I've focused on one thing over the last 25 years. It's helping professionals create demand for their services so they can win the work they really want with the clients they really want, and having their clients not just buy from them once, but over and over and over. This isn't built on manipulation or high-pressure sales tactics, but is instead a system that I've used with professionals in almost every industry. Whether it's professional services like lawyers, consultants, accountants, architects, engineers, or big service-based companies like healthcare or outsourcing, or even small business owners and people just starting up. So here are the top 9 tactics I've seen work as I and my teams have trained over 50,000 professionals all over the world. Let's start with our first lesson, and it's a big one. It's the misconception that people that are good doing the work can't learn how to win the work. All the research out there shows that every complex skill is both learned and earned. Dr. K. Anders Ericsson was the worldwide expert in expertise. And what he found in his research, multiple decades, is that anybody who's great at a complex skill learned it and earned it. Nobody is just born with it. The story I'll tell you is my own. And that's when I had to go through the transition from doing the work to also winning the work. I was an actuary. I took all the exams in the United States to become a licensed actuary, a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. At that time, back in the 80s and 90s, it was 24 different exams with a pass rate of around 35%. Well, because I would get devoured in studying twice a year when the examination periods were, I couldn't really lead big client relationships at the consulting firm I was at. So the very month I passed my last exam, we had it in the works to have me transition from a role 100% or nearly 100% focused on doing the work to one that was nearly 100% focused on winning work that hadn't been purchased yet. I showed up at my office early that Monday morning. I was excited to get started. And when my manager came in, I asked him for the manual on business development, bringing in the work that we wanted. After his chuckle, he said, "There's no manual, just treat the client right. You'll do great." I felt pressure. I was used to learning massive amounts of information every 6 months. So I read books, I took people to lunch, I started taking notes. Through that experience, I actually figured out what worked and what didn't. I really struck gold when I got into peer-reviewed research, specifically around 3 areas. Why do clients buy from one person and not another? How are deep relationships formed? And how do we hack our own habits to stay on top of the winning of the work while we're slammed doing the work? All that effort started to pay off. And within a few short years, I had some of the largest global accounts that I was leading with massive, highly talented teams, and I was having a blast. The thing that will unlock all of these benefits for you and others is being generous. It's giving. And all the rest of these tactics are going to show you precisely how to do it. This perfectly leads me into the second lesson. Always make a recommendation. Now notice I put always in the front of that. I always want you to make a recommendation. This gives the client the gift of clarity. When you're having a meeting, maybe on some deep technical issue, if you pack the meeting with all kinds of great content, they leave thankful, but also confused. You always want to pair being helpful and helping other people learn things they don't know, creating possibility, with a recommendation for a next step. That gives them clarity and gives them the feeling of progress. Now, some people say ABC, always be closing. I get it. And I know they're trying to be helpful when they say things like that. But that implies that you should always be asking for the business at every step of the way. And that just doesn't feel right to people. When you meet somebody the very first time or somewhere in the middle of a long series of discussions on a really important topic, if you're always saying, "I would love to work with you," or "You should hire us," it just doesn't feel right. Instead, if you're always making a recommendation that feels right to you and feels right to them, that is clarity. It's clearing through the clutter and it's letting them know what they should do next and react to it in ways you can both decide what makes sense. Now, let me make a recommendation about how to make recommendations. The first is how you say them, and the second is when you say them. Here's how you say them. There's 2 great ways to phrase a recommendation. One leads on the science of authority, and one leans on the science of social proof. Purchasing something new can be really stressful. So the authority way of making a recommendation is, hey, this has been a great discussion. What I'd recommend we do next is blank. Now notice, that's a pretty strong way of saying a recommendation. It's saying, I am the authority figure. The other way, using social proof, people tend to feel comfortable doing things their peers and colleagues and other people do. It's quite a bit softer. Hey, this has been a great discussion. What most of our clients do next is blank. This is making your other clients the authority figure. I tend to use the authority recommendation when it's more of a command and control type of do what your boss says kind of culture. And I tend to use the social proof recommendation when it's more of a collegial, let's all make this decision together type of a culture. The second big recommendation I have about recommendations is when to give them. This is not something you want to sneak in with 30 seconds to go in a meeting. You want to have time to discuss. Now, you can scale this up or down based on the length of the overall meeting, but a good rule of thumb is if you've got an hour deep technical topical discussion, you want to leave at least 10 or 15 minutes at the end to make your recommendation and discuss it. If you're spending a half-day workshop with somebody talking about something really, really deep and technical, maybe you're co-creating how you're going to do some work together, then you might want to spend 30 minutes at the end to make a recommendation and discuss it. No matter what it is, figure out what your recommendation is, practice how you're saying it, and leave time at the end to discuss it with your clients so you can all head nod and say, that makes sense, let's set it up. So here's lesson 3, which answers the question, how do I get things going in the very beginning? Great things can start from a coffee chat, a great dinner at a restaurant, or right in the middle of doing exceptional work that you're hired to do. And it starts with a magical phrase. I love this one. It's called, would it be helpful if? Whenever you're trying to figure out, or you've even got just an idea of what a next logical step might be to do with a client, but there's nothing going on right now, there's no momentum in that area, you can say, would it be helpful if? Hey, would it be helpful if we got together for a coffee chat and just talked about your career and I can look for some ways to be helpful? Hey, it sounds like change management is a big worrisome part of what you're thinking about after we do this strategy. Would it be helpful if I introduced you to our change management expert and maybe she can map out what the first couple steps would be? And it can be especially helpful, say, when you're having a general and jovial conversation with somebody, but you want to transition it to business, something a bit more commercial. So say you met somebody at a conference, you're having a great conversation, and those elevator bays are going to open up pretty soon. You don't have a lot of time, so you can say, hey, would it be helpful if I shared that white paper I talked about a second ago, and I'd even be willing to come to your offices or meet over Zoom and talk about how those new regulations are going to apply to your exact organization. Here's why would it be helpful if is so darn powerful. It's the idea of a cliffhanger. Think about that TV series that you like more than any other. And I guarantee you that showrunner and those writers are thinking more about the last 3 minutes of that show than any others. And a cliffhanger, really simply, is something unresolved that's going to get resolved very soon. Cliffhangers are powerful because they leverage the science of curiosity. Curiosity is one of the very few intrinsic motivators in the human brain, meaning we don't need a reward to actually like to experience it. So when you say, would it be helpful if I did an analysis and I'm happy to show it with you and we can meet and talk about how it applies to your specific organization, the cliffhanger is, I wonder what's in the analysis. And they're looking forward to that next meeting and hearing the answer to this thing that they're really curious about. Okay, lesson 4, the idea of co-creation. Co-creation is incredibly powerful, but a lot of people don't know how powerful it is. It's based on a mental heuristic called the IKEA effect, studied by Michael Norton and an all-star research team out of Harvard. One of the most important elements of this study is that we buy into what we help create. Not only do we like what we help create, but we think it's better than it is. So after you make your recommendation, and remember, you've left time to discuss it, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, you want to solicit improvement ideas. You want to ask them, how would you change this? How can we make it better? I think maybe that's 80% of the way there. How can we finish up that last 20% and make it perfect? You're likely going to get your client to come up with lots of great ideas, And as they do, they're buying into what they help create. Let me give you an example of what co-creation could look like. Now, there's a million ways you can do it, so this is going to be a relatively narrow example, but a really important one. Let's say you're going to co-create a proposal. By doing so, you might be able to avoid it going out to bid, and you might be able to get 4 incremental yeses that get to a big yes at the end. The 4 steps you would go through to co-create a proposal are to agree on the goals, get it partially right, share it with a client, let them tweak it. After you've got the goals, define the process. You're the expert on the process, but they know timing internally that they might want to incorporate, and by allowing them to do that, you've got your second incremental yes. The third thing that you want to talk about is the people. Who should be involved on their team? Who should be involved on your team? And it's only them that they realize the amazing resources that you're bringing to this project or this program. And then the last thing is the terms. You don't want to talk about the financial stuff until they understand the goals and the process and the people involved, because that's the only way the context of how much they're going to pay and invest in you is going to make sense. Now, you can go through that same process, goals, timing, people, and any terms, for anything, but that's just one example that you might think about. Here's the broader idea, though. The broader idea is people want to add value. People want to put their fingerprints on things. People want to be helpful. And if you think as the expert, you're going to take something to the client and give it to them 100% perfect, the only way that they can add value is to tear it apart or poke at it. So you're actually far better off taking things to them partially done, framing it as 70 or 80 or 90% right, and then solicit their improvement ideas to make it great. And now on to lesson 5, one of my favorites. Now, this is based on some research by Adam Grant out of Penn. And what he found is that there's a specific way to think about giving that has the best results. He looked at givers, takers, and people in between, matchers. His definition of givers were people that give without any expectation of return. His definition of takers are the opposite, people that take at every opportunity. They try to get everybody else to do their work for them. And matchers were almost in between, but in a specific way. In every conversation, it was, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. They're always trying to make the exchange equal. Well, everybody thought that once the study was done, the givers would win. They'd be the most successful. That wasn't the case. It turned out that some of the givers were the most successful, but some of the givers were the least successful. And then in the middle were, of course, matchers slightly above takers. So what gives with givers? Why are some of them at the very top and some of them at the very bottom? Well, it turns out there was one key difference. The strategic givers, or what Adam called successful givers or people that are otherish, were the folks that knew how to say no. They still expected nothing in return from any gift, but they scaled up the size of their gift or down depending on the expected outcome. The unsuccessful givers, the folks at the bottom of the successful ladder, were ones that didn't know how to say no, that said yes to anything that came their way. They tended to either get burned or burn out. A strategic giver is going to give to everybody, never expecting anything from any particular give that they make. But if they get a random cold email, they're going to box that into 10 or 15 minutes. If a big client asks for them for something very important and strategic, well, they might box that into 10 or 15 hours. They're strategically thinking through, how much should I invest based on the expected outcome, and they're making that investment with agency. Giving will get you ahead, but only if you give strategically. Here's the 6th lesson. It's the ability to flex and give the client what they need, not necessarily what you prepared to do. Here's what I mean. There's 3 big ways that we can add value with a client when we meet with them. In person, virtually, whenever it is. Number 1 is technical advice. Number 2 is with strategic ideas. And number 3 is with emotional support. Because almost all experts prepare for meetings with them centering around the technical advice they're going to give. We already talked about would it be helpful if, and making a recommendation and things like that. We almost always miss in the moment when the client really needs new strategic ideas or emotional support. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each of those. First, strategic ideas. This is when you arrive at a meeting and a client's really perplexed by something. They can't figure out why their department isn't performing or how they should reorganize it or figure out how they're going to handle a tricky situation with their boss. These are moments where you should take the PowerPoint or the other preparation you've created, put it aside, and lean into just being helpful, brainstorming a little bit, thinking about all the options, and helping that client figure out strategically what they should do. A lot of times your clients know the answer. They don't necessarily need technical advice around a situation, but they just need somebody to nod and say, that's the right thing to do. Or be somebody that's in a third-party situation outside their organization and just listen and just say, that must be difficult. Emotional support is sometimes the most important value that you can provide. So whether it's technical advice or it's strategic ideas or it's emotional support, the key is to not always think the way that you're going to add value is with your technical chops and your advice. Sometimes those other two ways are actually the most powerful thing you can do to deepen a relationship and be helpful. Lesson 7 is what we like to call being passionately agnostic. What does that mean? That means after you make a recommendation, you want to disconnect yourself from the outcome and be passionate that you can help the client, but agnostic about whether they take you up for it or not. Here's why you want to adopt this mindset. If you really want the next step, if you really are pushing them to say yes to it, you're probably more influential than you think, and you can likely get a yes from them when they don't really mean a yes. We also call this having happy ears. Happy ears are where you're looking for the yes when it really isn't there, and you're not observing all the other cues that say this really isn't something they're excited about. Here's the deal. You actually want a no, and you want to know right away if it's a no. And you want a yes, and you want a yes right away if it's a yes. What you want to avoid is the slow no. That's where you keep coercing the other group to say yes and keep meeting and keep talking about things. And then after 17 meetings, you realize there was nothing there to do in the first place because they really weren't that excited about it. One way you can do this is with some research called the BYAF approach. It stands for but you are free. You don't have to use this exact wording, but if after you make a recommendation, you can actually make it clear to the client that they don't have to accept your recommendation, then they're actually more likely to accept your recommendation if they really want it. The BYAF approach is scientifically sound. It's been studied in 100 different ways. And what you can do is after you make a recommendation, just say, make it clear that, hey, it's totally up to you. You don't have to take us up on this investment, but we'd be very interested in doing it if you're interested. Lesson 8 is an extension of lesson 7, just put in really practical terms. And it's ending a recommendation with or not and a question mark. So you make a recommendation and then you say, does that appeal to you or not? Or would that be helpful to you or not? Or do you think the CEO would like that or not? By putting those two little words at the end of a question or not, it ends the question with just a little bit of negativity, which is glorious. It helps you in two ways. If they truly aren't really that interested, they'll tell you, or there's a higher likelihood that they'll tell you. This helps you avoid happy ears because you're truly showing you're listening. But if they're interested, they're going to come back even stronger and let you know that, oh no, we'd really like to take you up on that offer. It sounds fantastic. So one of the best ways to elicit a true response is just simply ask, does that sound good to you or not? And here's lesson 9. It's always your move and it's always a chance to be helpful. I've had this wonderful experience of being able to work with the highest level top performers at every one of our clients. So what we find is they have this mindset no matter what comes their way, good news, bad news, any news, they respond with a generous next step that deepens the relationship. A quick way to think about this and make the right mindset shift is to shift from thinking I'm playing tennis to I'm practicing my serve. When you're playing tennis, you only volley back when somebody volleys to you. And if you've got that mindset around client outreach, that's not a good place to be because A lot of times clients don't respond to your emails or to your outreaches or to your offers. And if you're always waiting on them to respond till you respond, it's not going to move quickly. Instead, if you can think of it as, I'm always practicing my serve. I'm just going to keep volleying value. I'm just going to keep offering to be helpful over and over and over. Something's going to stick at some point, and I'm going to get engaged. Let's say that you just learned that you didn't win a really big deal that you really wanted. You really wanted this. So a great move in that situation would be to use that loss to set up your next win. Ask for a debrief call. Ask what you can learn. Ask the client, what's the number one thing you would keep about how we interacted with you on this? What's the number one thing you would change? As fast as you can learn that, now you can pivot the conversation to talk about, hey, we'd like to invest in your relationship. What are other priorities you have that we might be able to help you with? And then leave with some really tangible next steps. This can also work with positive news. You got a referral. You had a first conversation. It sounded great. There's the next step. As soon as you end that meeting, you can be thinking of, what's a little extra added value I can add? Maybe it's a higher level expert you can bring to the meeting. Maybe there's a thought piece you can send over ahead of time. Maybe whatever analysis you talked about, you can do it a little bit better or a little bit more robustly. Whether it's bad news or good news, it's always your move. It's always a chance to be helpful, and you can always lean in with agency. As I think about the 25 years that I've been at this, there's a clear delineation between those that are not successful and those that are successful. Those that are successful make relationship development a priority. They lean in. They do it first in the week and first in the day. They give first. They make sure that they're always offering helpfulness, and they're always doing it in a way that's proactive. It's always their move. And lastly, they're always improving. They treat winning the work as a craft to the level that they treat doing the work as a craft. And if you do those things over and over and over, I guarantee you're going to make a bigger impact than you ever thought that you could. If you want to take things deeper, check out my book, Give to Grow, where I dive into all these topics and a whole lot more in much more detail. And watch the next video in this series. I think you're going to love it. Thanks for watching. I hope all of these lessons help you help your clients succeed.